Hello, everybody. Tyler James here with Comics Launch, and I have a great interview queued up for you all. So welcome, welcome, welcome. My guest today is creator Iván Brandon. He's a creator who has worked in film and television, animation, video games, and probably is best known for his American comic book work. I was a big fan of the Image comic series that he did, including Viking and Drifter. He's also written for Marvel and DC and IDW, among others. And now he's focused on launching his latest creator-owned project over on Kickstarter, which is the second volume for The Roman Stars, and is live now. Iván, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. It's always cool to talk to creators that have had the wide range of creative experiences, worked, doing your own creator own stuff, work for mainstream stuff. And so you bring a ton of perspective to the table. And so I'm sure we're going to have a good conversation here. But I never want to bury the lead, because I know how important it is to just when you're in Kickstarter launch mode, you got to make sure people know about it. So why don't you tell a little bit more about the project that you have going down on Kickstarter right now?
Yeah, it's we're about $17 from 200%, which is the most painful $17 to watch. But it's a story. It's a little bit hard to explain, but it's a Julius Caesar story. It's a version of Caesar that Rome is a planet. And Caesar takes his own sort of insecurities and everything that sort of built the Caesar we know into being this sort of conqueror, and takes those to the stars rather than to the sea. It's just a sort of examination of a version of Caesar, although. As has been pointed out, we've had a lot of historians who've read the book who are surprised by how sort of accurate to history it is, given the spaceships. But yeah, that's the Roman Stars.
Yeah, so I mean, this is always an interesting genre of doing reinterpretations of classic stories or classic tales or historical tales or true tales. I'm curious a little bit about how you go about deciding, well, what from the true history or from the record do we need to keep, and where do we really want to lean in on in terms of changing, going in a new direction and everything. How do you sort of get that balance right, and how do you get it so that, like, oh, hey, this is a new story, a new version of this story that's worth telling, versus just a retread. Yeah.
I've been weirdly working on sort of historical stuff for a little while, just in projects that a lot of stuff for like TV and stuff that people haven't necessarily seen yet. But it's always an interesting problem to solve, in that I think you obviously want to be reverent to the history to whatever degree, but I also think that, like in this particular case, Caesar's one of the most famous people in history, and it gives you a sort of freedom. I think that there are parts of his stories his story that pretty much everyone knows, and so I end up not feeling like I have to be a resource for information per se, like a data resource. And so a lot of it is just me sort of examining parts of how I imagined his arc that I hadn't seen really imagined, and not, which sounds like I'm talking about the sci-fi elements, but really what was compelling to me about Caesar were where he just sort of there were a lot of analogs with modern times, in terms of he was an incredibly popular leader with the people, with the populace, but incredibly unpopular with the government, and who just sort of had to bite their tongues and deal with him, work along with him, and then ultimately murder him. But it's that I thought was very interesting. It's just someone who spoke to someone who had enormous power, but was outside of sort of the chain of government, and sort of the rules of what people wanted to do. So that stuff was super interesting to me, and really me playing with the idea of just that, and like the mythology of something that comes up often in a lot of my work is just the idea of, when I deal with like Vikings or that kind of thing, and just the idea of sort of the mythology of a movement or a time and how that weighs on the people in that time. Meaning, if you're a young Viking coming up in, if you watch Goodfellas, not Goodfellas, sorry. If you watch The Sopranos, a lot of The Sopranos is just about the weight of the culture that they grow up in and their sort of place in time, and trying to live up to that, and feeling like they're past it, or feeling like it's gotten past them, or that kind of thing. And that to me is super fascinating. The idea of like sort of Caesar living in this world with, measuring himself against this sort of statues of Caesar.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. We do have a number of folks watching the stream. Also, if you happen to catch the replay, feel free to add questions. We will can make this interactive when we have people watching live. We love to do that. And also, if you have questions for Ivan, if you have questions about anything that you see on the Kickstarter, or just general creative questions, we're always happy to reward your time for tuning in live to put it into action right here in the interview. So we thank everybody for watching us on Facebook, YouTube, and X even. All right. So one thing that absolutely stands out on this project is the sort of the unique visual look of it. And I'm curious a little bit, like, this project could look a ton of different ways.
Sure.
Did you start with the visuals, or
no? We
start with the story?
Yeah, I started with the story, and then I'm working with an artist. Was working because the art's done. But
yeah,
I'm in working with this particular artist. V had such a phenomenal, unique vision for how we were going to lay these things out, and it for sure informed how I wrote it as we went, because I was ahead of V, but not like, I didn't finish. I don't like to finish the whole book before the art happens, because it doesn't. I kind of like to adapt and react to the art.
Yeah.
And so it became clear sort of what V's strengths were, and what V's, sort of unique skill set was. And that really made it really interesting to write, because I definitely wouldn't have approached this. It doesn't read like any of my other books, and I didn't approach it the way I would with these other books. And that, to me, I don't know, that's I've been doing this 22 years. And so at this point, that's the thing that's really exciting to me, is just really, really leaning into the collaborative aspect, and just, sort of finding what the sort of shared voice is, rather than just like focusing on my own.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was a lot of fun. We were both sort of very involved, directly or indirectly, with how the other person sort of worked. And V, like we did this landscape layout, and that was just a conversation with me and V, and saying like, hey, I really want going forward to be able to present all of my work as in, in a unique form, and just really sort of just decide, hey, if there's something that we haven't done before that might benefit this, to do it, and not really worry about sort of format or market or any of that stuff. And so in this particular case, we went with the wide format, because I was really obsessed with the idea of it being a journey. And so, there's a lot of really strong moves that V can make in sort of passing time by laying it out the way we did. And once I saw how it worked, it was just obvious that this was the format we needed to take.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, is the decision to go a widescreen format, and the strengths, opportunities, but potential cost benefit.
It causes problems for sure. Yeah, it causes problems, but they're problems that I was choosing not to, I don't want to say respect, but it's, I think a lot of comics, in my opinion, and certainly, in my career, is sort of fear-based in terms of like people really play it safe in certain ways. And so for me, I really wanted to just try things and really, a lot of the stuff we do in comics. And then again, like you said, I've worked for, all these publishers, and like a lot of the habits are 80-year-old habits, and they're not done because of the best way to do it. They're done because it's how we've always done it. And I just wanted to sort of play with throwing everything out and starting over and figuring out like sort of what works and what doesn't. And this, the main argument for me was that it was going to be aesthetically, it was very moving for me to make and to read. So, the other arguments are just sort of practical, non-creative arguments. So I just didn't want to really worry about like one of my most popular things that I ever did that I mentioned before was Viking, and Viking was not like this, but it was an odd format. It was wider and taller than a normal book. And at the time, we were very, very, very scared that the retail market was going to react poorly to it. And in fact, the opposite happened. The book sold out at a retailer conference in like an hour. And it really stuck with me, just the idea that like the comics don't have to all look the same. They don't have to be presented the same way. And
I mean, I think the Kickstarter platform is definitely one that lends itself to, hey, a unique vision. And because, people are evaluating you within the conference of the Kickstarter page, right? And they're making a decision there. I think you're right that sometimes like if where the channel is that you're going to go through may dictate at that. And the sort of common wisdom that you hear a lot is that, well, retailers hate obviously the weird shapes. And sometimes it's as simple as their shelves are designed to like maximize, comics that are all the same size. And, something like this it might get cut off by the rack, or or it would take the place of 2 books instead of 1 and all of that. But, when Kickstarter is sort of your initial launch platform, I think it lends itself to like there is no downside there. And then also,
and I think in general, I mean, Kickstarter is leans towards innovation. It's all the ads I get are just like, hey, finally your sponge is smart, like just stuff that's solving weird, innovative problems that don't all necessarily interest me, but in general, I think that the angle is, hey, we did something new. We created something new. And so that was definitely, for me, felt like a really great fit.
Yeah. So, as far as I know, this is your second crowdfunding project. Now, as someone that has worked with traditional publishers and has been in this game a long time, like, what was your sort of pre-launching? I think it was last year, pre-launching. What was sort of your attitude towards crowdfunding, sort of as you saw it coming along? And I'm wondering if maybe your attitude or approach to it changed over time. Before you looked into it.
My approach has changed. My attitude is similar. I think I handled the first volume differently than I handled the second volume, only because there was sort of an arrogance that was innate to what I was trying to pull off, which was basically that if I was abandoning my traditional models, I wanted to abandon everything just to figure out what was necessary. Like the dumb example I've been making is like when people do they do these food allergy tests and they get rid of all the stuff in their diet, they put it back one by one. So like that was kind of I kind of want to burn it all down and then start over. And then at first not listen to like sort of what anyone was saying and really just try to like from the ground up understand the mechanism.
Yeah. And, can you give some examples of some things that just burn
just like I fulfilled it myself, or like, a lot of the stuff about, people saying there were a lot of things that people talked about with pre-launch, for example, that I didn't lean into, mostly because I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't. And in the second time, I did a lot more of that stuff, and I did focus on that stuff a lot more. But it was really just me trying to, when I started in comics, I lettered my own stuff. I've colored comics. I've done. I really, really. It's important to me to understand every piece of everything.
Yeah.
So it was important for me to allow myself to possibly fail by, really seeing sort of the cause and effect of all the little pieces. So, the pre-launch was a big part of it. There are obviously fulfillment places that you can work with, and I chose not to because I really, really wanted to understand sort of the cost of doing it physically and otherwise. And, just sort of what it meant and what was involved. So that if I just like to, when I'm handing something off to someone, I like to understand what I'm handing them, I don't like to be one of these people who just sort of out of sight, out of mind. I really, really like to be, as much as possible. I mean, I can't draw like V, but as much as possible, I like to really, really feel like I can do most of, of what's being done.
Yeah.
Mostly because, you want to be empathetic and you want to be informed about how you're approaching these things. So that was, my initial approach was really sort of burn it all down and just start building it from scratch. The second one was a lot more of me looking at what had been successful for me before, what had been, and at this point I had a small audience to work with. So I had a lot of understanding of what they had liked about the first campaign, et cetera. And then I had, I had looked at a lot of your stuff. I looked at, a lot of people who are more consistently on Kickstarter and more consistently successful than I, or have been more successful rather than I had been in the first round, and to see sort of, what they do and what they're finding success with, and trying to, what's interesting for me on this stuff more than anything is like, yeah, there's an opportunity to make money, but to me, this is one of the greatest problems I have, I guess, with the modern comic industry. The print, the mainstream market is it's very sort of collectible based, and I don't see, it's a market that is about selling a unique piece of paper, and people lock it in a piece of plastic and never read it. And I wanted things people would read. And so this is really legitimately, hopefully, an opportunity to grow the audience rather than, it'd be nice to have their money because I need money to pay for things. But ultimately, it's a way to grow a group of people who are, interested in what I'm doing.
Yeah, getting that balance right. I think there are some creators that do it particularly well. And then there are some projects I look at where it's like, do you if you put half as much time into the story between the between the covers as the 35 covers that you're putting out here, maybe someone would actually read this thing. So yeah, it's definitely something to get a balance right on.
Yeah, there's a warehouse, not to digress on this, but there's a warehouse nearby that is closing. That's a really, really classic, the Coke warehouse, Coke, K-O-C-H, in Brooklyn, which is like just a very, in comics, they just have like all sorts of old stuff, collectible stuff in general. And then they're known for sort of vintage things. You come in with a weird list of comics that you've always wanted to see from wherever, or video game stuff or movies, and they're closing. And they did an interview recently on the Comics Journal. They were talking about how like it would basically be impossible for them to track the modern industry because you need an entire warehouse for every year, because it's every book has 20 covers, every book has whatever, and that's not the thing that's. I mean, I understand why people do it. I'm not trying to criticize. I understand, having worked in this stuff, the rise of the variant covers and all that sort of stuff. But it's very much, we don't have 1,000 readers, so we're going to charge 100 readers 10 times as much. Yeah, and that's for me very sort of untenable. It's not a way to, especially with what we do. It's not a way to just. I'm here to tell stories first and foremost. And pay my rent well enough that I can continue to do that. And I can't do that if I keep hitting 10 people up for more and more money. That's not, one of them's going to die. The other one's going to,
Yeah. But it's a weird, the Kickstarter platform is different than, say, like the direct market, in that, and I'm wondering if their recent UI overhaul may change this a little bit, but the success metrics in the direct market is copies sold, right?
Sure.
And so historically, you can see people gaming that in some ways over the years with like artificial, like certain issues we're going to massively drop the price, or we're going to keep the price, but it's going to be 3 times the size of it. And that will help us, make a value play, and total numbers sold in the market would be thing. And you'd also hear about like certain publishers that would play games like, all right, we're going to buy through a couple of different comic shops. We'll buy 50,000 copies of our comic to make it splash so that we can then sell the media deals or things. So it was really all about like gaming the numbers sold on Kickstarter. Like
you're calling the wire, juking the stats.
Yeah, exactly. On Kickstarter, it's sort of like the first number that everybody pays attention to is like that big funding number. And then backer count is kind of next, but it's not a perfect, or it's not your typical supply and demand price sensitive market. And so like sometimes like if all you were selling was like a $5 comic, versus if that was up against like $20 comics, maybe on a comic shelf, if they were equal, you might crush. On Kickstarter, you might actually be penalized because it takes you four backers to equal one backer for somebody charging a little bit more. And so or if you're not charging, doing variants or other things, if you're not doing that, like your campaign average pledge level is going to be lower, which then makes it harder to do paid advertising and other things. So it is a challenge, I know, for a lot of creators to find the right balance here.
Yeah, I think either way you're up, because in these particular cases, it's still a direct transaction between yourself and the audience, rather than, you're splitting with the audience. I mean, I'm sorry, with the retailer, you're splitting with the distributor, you're splitting with the publisher. In this particular case, your pot is probably smaller, but your percentage is higher. But I mean, ultimately, that's the number that I care about is how many people. We've had people like in our comments that are writing like, New York Times quality reviews of things that they enjoyed, and that's like, that's the kind of stuff I want to see, is someone who read the thing and was moved by it. Or, I mean, not everyone's going to like it, but the people who, and that's what I want to do. I want to move people. I want people to react to the things and want to read it. And then, and hopefully empower me to make, to make other weird, different comics.
Yeah, and I think if you can run like have your own tests of like, hey, every product I'm going to put out for this launch or this book is something I personally want to see exist in the world, right? And so like I see you've got some really great like variant covers and things from artists that you've worked with in the past, great pieces of art. And so like that's kind of the way to do it, rather than like, let's just throw a lot of stuff at the wall and hope that people out there are going to go after it.
Yeah, I'm trying to do limited, variant type stuff, but do a little bit, we're also trying to get as much noise around ourselves when we're starting out, but, to make these things still be sort of special things that you sit and read. They're still, they're still not, we're still trying to make it a tactile thing. Yeah. I think that, I think the difference with a lot of media, and I think that possibly part of why comics has been struggling of late, is we're in an extremely, certainly people my age are in an extremely digital world.
Yeah,
and comics has not really transitioned to the digital all that well. And I think that you see amongst younger people, for example, you see people leaning towards, people are listening to cassettes again, and there's people who like, vinyl is much bigger than it was 15 years ago, and that kind of stuff, where people like things that they can hold and that feel special to them, and that it has a just a personal nostalgic relevance, not necessarily nostalgic, but relevance to them personally. I mean, I talk about like when I was a kid, we had Karate Kid and Star Wars, and those were the only VHS tapes we had. So we just watched them endlessly. So they were
yeah, watch them until they snapped, right?
yeah, but they were the most important items in the house, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm not positive that it's better that I now have 10,000 movies at my fingertips, you know? I'm not positive that that's a more satisfying experience.
Well, it's funny because, you know, my wife and both my wife and my stepdaughter, like they have the 10,000 things at their disposal with all the streaming services to go to bed every night. They just throw on Friends. And when it gets to the end, they go back to the beginning. And that's sort of like the comfort, you know, watch. Right. And yeah, it's something that definitely pervades the culture and things like that. And you know, you did make the point about digital comics, and it's funny how like since, you know, I don't know, 2007, 2008, like we've seen like a lot of different versions of, hey, this is going to be the future of comics or a future of digital comics. And like it went from like, hey, or now you can read comics and you know, as a web comic. Then it went widescreen. Now like and then Comixology came along and it was like guided panel by panel. Maybe that's the future. Now like Webtoon, the infinite scroll is kind of things. And I don't know that anything though has we've also seen motion comics and, you know, enhanced comics and things like that. It seems to me though that the sales of digital comics have been pretty flat.
Yeah, I mean, what
years and years, right?
Monster business, but I think in terms of like the kind of stuff that looks like, you know, what I've mostly made in my life and the people that I know, I think that stuff has been, you know, they've been pretty. The sales have been tepid, I think, partially because they're terrified of upsetting the retailer base, and so the prices are not really compatible with digital media in general. Yeah. And yeah, you know, to your point, I think that they're just an inferior format of paper comics, and they're, you look at Comixology. I never was interested in the guided view, but if you look at the format of their page, and I'm not trying to shit on Comixology, they've been very good to me, but I think that Comixology, if you go onto their main site, it's pretty much like a comic shop. It's very difficult to penetrate unless you already know what you're looking for.
Well, I mean, I think it is dramatically worse after the
oh, for sure,
the
yeah,
Amazon takeover. I mean, it's basically like I haven't bought a comic from there in years because it's like the search is broken. Like it used to feel like the closest thing to, hey, it's Wednesday, here are the new comics. Like it used to feel like it was a digital comic shop, and
yeah, but for me, the thing is always for people who don't know anything about comics, which to me should be the primary market, like target market, because we need to expand it. For those people, I think going into there, it's very, you know, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of amazing comic shops. I'm not trying to disparage, but it's obviously not an uncommon comment made by people who aren't familiar, that they don't necessarily feel comfortable. They don't necessarily feel like they know how to engage with a comic shop. Yeah. And so to me, Comixology's storefront is very similar to that. If you don't, you sort of have to be a comic fan to go in there and use it, which to me, that's not how any of this stuff, like, you know, all these things you're talking about, the 10,000 movies and all this sort of stuff, like that's not just for movie fans. That's just for people who want to watch anything. And a lot of this stuff to me feels very unapproachable. And that's part of the charm of using Kickstarter is, you know, trying to make it approachable so that some random person who's never read a comic in their life might be like, oh, what is this? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the other thing that I was thinking about just when we're talking about formats and things is, you know, I went to the library with my son the other day. He's 6, come back, and the books that he got range in thickness, range in size, range in shape, format, all over the place. Very, very welcoming to it. And so libraries out there that have like this seems like a book that, you know, would do great like on a library shelf as well. And there would be no problem there. Whereas, you know, maybe certain retailers might be more set in their ways. And if it's not, you know, can't be bagged and boarded, like we don't know where to put it. But when it comes to bookstores or library shelves, you know, I think they seem to show a big interest in, you know, a wide variety of formats, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, to me, when you do something in an odd format, when we did Viking, I mean, the hardcover collection was literally like 20 something inches tall.
Yeah.
And when you do something like that, yes, it's not going to fit into the same box, but the point is so that the customer, which theoretically benefits, hopefully the benefits the retailer, is going to come in and be like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, well, I think I actually had that reaction when I found it on the shelf of my local library. Actually,
that's the goal.
Jumped out at it.
Yeah, you should always be aspiring, I think, to jump out at the audience to be like, wow, this doesn't look like, you know, because there's 1,000 things that look identical. That's all noise to me.
Yeah.
You know, when I walk into the shop, and then what's this thing that doesn't look like those things? That's going to be the first place I look.
Yeah. So after that first Kickstarter campaign, you know, you wanted to get your feet, you wanted to dive in with both feet, get your hands dirty, use every process. Were there anything in particular that surprised you about it, or things that you thought would be easy that were hard, things that you thought would be hard that actually that wasn't that bad?
Yeah, just little things I think that are tricky, and it's not because there's not information about it, but it's not. You know, just figuring out shipping and that kind of thing. That was a big point, I know, of fear. I'm sure it is for everybody when they're first starting this stuff, of just like, oh, am I going to do this wrong? Am I going to list the wrong price? That kind of thing. Am I going to get screwed? Yeah. Or am I going to even charge people too much and have them be upset at me, or that kind of thing? So that was a fear. There were a lot of little bits of information that I found tricky to find. Once I sort of went through that once with the shipping, that's not a fear anymore. But yeah, definitely early on starting to do that kind of stuff, it you know, it just became, you know, and people speak pretty, I don't want to say harshly, but like about the fulfillment process and how, you know, it's stressful. I didn't find the fulfillment to be that bad. I found, you know, the day-to-day to be stressful in terms of like watching the clock and that kind of thing and doing all that. But like, once you sit down and do the fulfillment, that to me is just like, it's grunt work. You know, it weirdly is satisfying because it's a thing you can see. You packed it right, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, and I found that a lot, especially I think for a lot of creatives who are so used to most of what we do is this open-ended, like puzzles that we are like, I mean, creating. It's like you're putting together a puzzle, but there is no, there's no box. So you are creating every piece of it, and then also crafting your career is like that of what project should I work on, what to, you know, where should I focus, what should I be doing, and there's kinds of stuff, and to actually have a concrete, discrete task that you can see with visual, tangible evidence, you know, how to do it, and that there's a definitive end, like that kind of thing. It becomes like a really sexy proposition, right?
Exactly. I just did these 20 boxes. They're going to the post office. I know exactly sort of what accomplishment level that was and what it took to get there. Whereas like, I've got a blank page that, you know, that could be a mile away from me or at 10,000 miles. And I don't know, you know, what it's going to take to get there.
Yeah. It's funny. So, I mean, you've, over the course of your career, different publishers, you've worked with like a tremendous amount of talent. You know, some of your who's who, Isad Ribic, Michael Avon Oming, Nick Klein, Eduardo Risso, Gene Ha, Alex Malev, Eric Annette, just a ton of talent. I'm curious, like, as you are sort of moving forward, and, you know, trying to put new projects together, how are you going about, or have you found that like recruiting talent for crowdfunding projects is different than recruiting them for, say, hey, let's pitch so it's a publisher, or has this changed sort of your approach of like what projects are going where, or how you're thinking about things?
No, I mean, sort of the difference with that stuff, I was already sort of familiar with it. It can be a bit of an uphill battle with people who, it's a business of people who sort of grew up reading Marvel comics and they aspire to that kind of thing. And I think that like, getting people to sort of take the risk to do something of their own, which I strongly look, it's not necessarily for everyone, but like, I've been at Image for 20 years and that, trying to get people to do that kind of stuff can be tricky because I think people are afraid, and it's different than an editor telling you, here's what you're getting paid. This is your, kind of like what you said about the boxes, even though creatively it's daunting, but X period of time, your rent is paid, and that like, you're going to get a script that's going to tell you what to draw, etc. Versus like, hey, let's create a thing from scratch is scarier. It's sort of working in someone else's restaurant versus building a restaurant. So yeah, that can be tricky, and it's not for everyone. And look, people have kids and whatever, and they have fears related to that stuff. But I think a lot of what I'm trying to do, it's sort of where I'm at, that I think connects with people creatively is, a lot of us don't really get to creatively do the kind of stuff that we want to be doing at this stage in the game. And that's really my focus right now, is just like, hey, at whatever length, it might be 100 pages, it might be 20 pages, whatever it is figuring out ways that creatively I can do the kind of stuff that really, really connects with me. And then like, I like you said, I mean, I have these powerhouse, amazing artist friends, but who've had a pretty limited window in terms of what kind of stuff that they can draw. Yeah. And so figuring out opportunities for them to just, creatively stretch their legs a little bit and do things that they wouldn't traditionally do in their normal sort of day-to-day work life, and find, it's people think of sort of writing and drawing as this incredibly sort of freeing, like you're an artist on a hillside painting a sunset, but like a lot of it, there's not that much of it as things go forward. A lot of it becomes sort of work and becomes business and that kind of stuff. And trying to, I'm a single guy and I go out on dates with people. And when I tell them that I'm a writer, what they imagine I do is so much more romantic than what I actually do. Trying to sort of recapture almost that version of what they're seeing. And like, what did I get into this for?
Yeah, I blame Hollywood for that, because I'd say 40% of protagonists or in film is the writer who, oddly enough, in the 90-minute movie might write for like one hot like montage and then they're done, but the rest of their life involves like no work, right?
Yeah, but so it's like finding a balance where like it's not that level, but it's not just work. Like there's got to be some romance in there, and finding that is kind of what I've been trying to do, because it's a very common concern amongst like close friends of mine who have been doing sort of this big superhero type stuff for so long, is that, it pays the bills and some of them are very successful, but creatively they're not necessarily getting their needs met, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, and there's certain creators that seem to be able to, walk in both worlds and use one to propel the other. And I think that's probably the dream, right? To be able to have some steady checks from the biggest publishers and to get to, scratch those like childhood itches of playing in the sandboxes, but then at the same time being able to use that notoriety to launch your own, massive IPs and things. And so like your Robert Kirkman's now, I think James Tynion is probably, teed up to, have a strong decade of being able to do that. But and I think even more so on artists, it rarely is it like, one feeds into the other. Often it's like, oh, I got to choose, right? There's only so much time in the day.
Yeah, artist specific. Yeah, exactly. There's only so much. If you're an incredibly fast, I mean, in the old days, it used to be the standard of a page a day. Now that's incredibly rare. So if you've only got one page you can do in a day, then you're going to have to pick the one that's going to feed your kids, in my case, I luckily have a little bit more flexibility. I mean, that's part of why I did all this stuff, is I luckily got to a place in my career where I my stuff was selling relatively consistently, even on creator-owned stuff. So it's just, I took it as an opportunity to use that, to see what kind of risks I can take and to see what kind of, differences I can make in how I approach these things.
Yeah.
And I was pretty confident when I did this book that I wasn't gonna lose money on it. So it's if it's a fairly lateral move in terms of my ability to eat, me doing something that seems very mainstream or very sellable versus something that feels a little more weird but more emotionally fulfilling. Like
Yeah.
it feels like I got to do that one.
Yeah. So now, is this project wrapped with the 2 volumes, or is there
Yeah.
more?
Although, yeah, I've been nudged by folks that I mean, look, it's the Roman Empire had a good run. So this is the end of Caesar's story.
Caesar 2.
Well, there was a Caesar 2 is the thing. There was.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well,
He
Rome
was,
still exists, right?
exactly. And they had. Well, look, I mean, his story is really interesting because like his name was Caesar, but they used the title Caesar to be it became a rank.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting story. Sort of people, and it sort of goes to what I'm talking about is people measuring up to this idea of being a Caesar. So there's obviously stuff in that is compelling. I've got to finish a couple other things before I can even think about that. But yeah, there's a ton of, I think it's one of the best things I've ever done, if not the best thing. And so, yeah, it definitely calls to me in terms of me wanting to do more, but it hasn't, I don't know specifically. If I did more, it would probably be, yeah, like you said, Caesar 2. It would probably be Octavian, his adopted son, because that's also like the stuff that happens immediately after Caesar is crazy. It's Caesar's only child died. She dies in the first book. He then gives his name to his nephew, Octavian, who becomes Augustus Caesar. And he has an illicit relationship with Cleopatra, which produces a son who is, there are different opinions on whether or not it's actually his son, but the only possible blood child he has is then murdered by Augustus. So it's a lot of fun, interesting drama that happens after Caesar.
Yeah. Well, you have some really cool slipcase editions that can get you both volumes, right? And a number of really good looking options over there. So hopefully people will jump in, grab the whole complete story. It just needs to be printed, right? So you're in good shape there.
Half of it's printed, but the other half we're dealing with the same printer. We got really, really cool options for what we're gonna do, and yeah, I'm excited to get this out there. It's hopefully be out for like the summer.
Yeah, awesome. I know, for a lot of comic book writers, like the writing aspect can be a little bit of a sort of solitary effort, but I know that you had the experience of working for a TV show on ABC in a writer's room. I'm curious what that experience was like, and then has working in TV changed, working in a writer's room sort of changed your approach to writing for comics at all?
Yeah, it's very different in that comics is, for good or for ill, sometimes I think for ill, it's a very sort of auteur-driven, this is my creative vision. I'm the wizard in charge.
Yeah.
Whereas TV is the opposite. You're one of, on the show you're talking about, there were 13 of us, something like that. And so you're throwing things at the wall, and like if it sticks, then you keep talking. If not, my cat just woke up in the background. If not, someone else speaks, and it's a very humbling, to my mind, in a good way. It's a very humbling process because it's just sort of sink or swim. And it's not in like when you're pitching sometimes on tiny little things, just like sort of what the person is doing today, that kind of thing. And so it's not like your entire existence is locked to this idea that you're pitching. It's just sort of yes or no. Oh, that's cool. Let's run with that for a second. And then someone asks that.
Closer to baseball than it is a Kickstarter, where like it's all or nothing versus, hey, most people aren't going to get a hit every time you get up.
That's to me a bit of a relief because it's one, it's less pressure. You're not in charge of the entire thing. You don't have to carry the entire thing on your back. A and B, you get to, which is a rarity, and like you said, it's a very solitary experience for comic writers. You get to see how other people think, and you get to see their brains throwing stuff at which is not a thing a writer, at least a comic writer, usually gets to experience. So that was, we had some really, really, really great writers. People had written on The Shield, written on The West Wing, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And to just see their brains moving and to sort of be able to pitch in and collaborate with them, it definitely changed. Like when I say that now my focus really is collaboration, that's true even in like TV type stuff. I really like the idea of really understanding that I'm just a piece of a puzzle,
Yeah.
and hopefully I'm a good piece, hopefully I bring something special to the table, but I can't carry the entire thing. I can't. This book is a beautiful, beautiful book. It would not look, if it was just me, it wouldn't be that. What V did was indispensable, the artist, and it's super important to build that stuff. It's as important for me to surround myself with people who I think can do a good job as it is for me to be a good writer, if not more so.
Yeah. Nice. Well, this is good stuff. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing it. The book is The Roman Stars, Volume 2. Volume 1 is also available. 22 days to go over on Kickstarter as we're recording this live stream. It will still be on for most of this month, or for the rest of this month, which is awesome. Beyond this Kickstarter and after this Kickstarter, is anything else coming up that you want to tease? Or
yeah, I've got 2 other things. Probably both will be on Kickstarter. One of them is, I don't know how to tease this one, but it's big, and it is definitely, it's something familiar to people who've been following me, but it is like kind of maybe the biggest thing I've ever done, and that'll be probably the next thing I do. Will be a nice, the ultimate form of something that people have already read. Some people have already read, and then after that, I'm doing a spy book with an Italian artist named Helena Masalis. A Brazilian Italian artist. And that I'm really, really excited about. I'm writing the second volume now. Helena's drawing the first volume. But that'll be a unique, really, really unique looking book. And I'm just trying to do, still doing odds and ends here and there with the very slowly reawakening Hollywood machine.
Yeah.
But yeah, just really just trying to make cool, weird comics. That's emotionally, that's the thing I'm most excited about.
Yeah. And it seems like where you're leaning at is, when we're going to do a Kickstarter launch, we're going to launch it for, a volume, a graphic novel, a book with a spine, essentially. Have you considered or been thinking about serializing anything on the platform, or do you prefer sort of let's wait till I have a big chunk of book to put in people's hands?
For a couple of reasons, I like the big chunk of book, partially because I also know people have been burned by some people sort of flicking out on this stuff, and I you can see on both my campaigns, I did sort of, I showed the work to show that it was done, because I don't want to be focused on that, but I do think it's important for me to show people, like, hey, we've done this thing. You're not paying for a possibility of a thing. You're paying for a thing. But also, I've just been doing issues for so long, and it's a very frustrating format to work in any number of different ways. It is counterintuitive in some ways, in terms of how structurally you're working for the deadlines that are sort of arbitrary, and they're based on dealing with the direct market. But if in this case I'm not working with the direct market, then it's not really important to meet those kind of things. I think what I connect with the most creatively these days, at least, is to tend to be somewhat finished, like more an arc than a piece of an arc, and that's just really calling me. So who knows? I'll never say never. And I also, one of the things that I'm trying to do is really play with just all sorts of different formats and really just experiment with the scale of all of these things. So I think that um, I may do much shorter things. I'm unlikely to do, at least for the near future, a short serialized thing, but I might do shorter format things. I might do, sort of one shot type things, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you never know. I just right now I'm a lot of the feedback that I'm getting in the direct market is that like certain publishers I won't name have done a lot of work at making it really, really tricky for retailers to order single issues and to figure out how to connect with that stuff. And a lot of it is what we're talking about in terms of variants and that kind of stuff and relaunches and reboots and all this sort of stuff. And so I'm trying to focus on, if I'm not going to do that, and if I'm not just constantly trying to juke these stats as we were talking about, then I just sort of want to give a story that you can sit and you can know whether or not you've enjoyed it, and you can move on if you need to, or you want more. But I don't know. I'm just sort of trying to experiment with pushing in a different direction with that sort of stuff, and partially because it's been, from a retailer perspective, it's been a rough few years in terms of how the content has been presented to them. So
yeah, well, it's I feel like in a lot of ways we've just as humanity used to things getting better and better and better, and in some cases it's like you look at the retail system, like they can't even track sales like they used to right now. And so it's definitely
really hard for them to know what to order. It's really hard, and they're ordering from 4 different catalogs or whatever now, and so it's
books coming in at any different time. Yeah,
and that's rough. And that's my thing, is like, when you look at this, I'm not trying to do like, oh well, Spider-Man is popular because of this or whatever. Like, it's a thing, you can tell what it is, you either want it or you don't want it, that kind of thing. Versus like, these things are all dependent on weird little ephemeral side things, and almost none of them have to do with like, is it good?
Right.
So that's I want to focus on, is it good? And hopefully the answer is yes to people. I can't control that part of it, but like, if the answer is yes, then maybe you want some more. But it really bothers me that so much of this business is not about, is it good?
Right. Yeah. It's can we make money on it? Is it going to sell? And is the audience already there for it? Right.
Yeah. You might as well just sell the covers at that point.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So.
Well, Ivan, it's been fun chatting with you, talking with you. Beyond the Kickstarter, which will be up for a while still, what's the best place for people to connect with you, catch up with you, follow your stuff?
Just probably Instagram. I'm not really on social media all that much anymore. I've been trying to live a chaste life in the world. But yeah, my Instagram is the place where I throw out my dumb jokes and my promotion for stuff occasionally.
Well, awesome. I appreciate you taking the time to share this project. It looks amazing, and we're excited to see you keep pushing the envelope and sharing even more stuff on Kickstarter and beyond, man. Appreciate you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank everyone else for tuning in, and we can't wait to see what you launch next. Take care, everybody.